Welcome back to Let's Get Technical, the IES video series where we're digging into the details of technical rules and regulations, what they mean for the environment, and some of their unintended consequences. At the heart of the series is the relationship between science, policy, and practical delivery. It's all about how we turn our ambitions into reality. If we want to meet our net zero goals and achieve energy security, we need to get serious about creating more wind turbines offshore. I spoke with Kathryn, an IES member working in the world of marine consenting, to find out more and get answers to our big three questions. What's the problem? What does it cost us? And what can we do about it? Let's hear what Kathryn has to say.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathryn, Principal Consultant at Hal Marine Consulting. So I specialise in kind of strategic and technical advice on all things marine consenting, regulation. Do a lot of work with offshore wind and consenting processes around the UK, looking at how we can improve those processes. Anything decision-making is kind of what I'm interested in. I have a PhD in marine licensing from the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape at Newcastle University, where my real interest there was looking at how we can improve the marine licensing process, particularly related to public engagement and just generally making decision-making better. I have experience working at the Marine Management Organization, again in marine licensing. You'll start to see a theme, where I did a lot of licensing for offshore projects, again, including advice on large-scale offshore wind. For me, one of the biggest problems we have within the kind of environmental science space at the moment is consenting for offshore wind. And I don't just mean the offshore arrays, I mean the whole system that brings that energy generation to the people that need it in a way that helps us meet our 2050 net zero ambitions. One thing I'm not going to do now is talk about the environmental benefits and challenges of offshore wind. That's a whole other conversation. I'm going to talk about the regulation and the consenting. I guess it's a problem that we're trying to find solutions for, and we're always getting better. I'll caveat kind of right at the beginning, I do think this is something that we're all working towards improving. The problem is how we consent all of the offshore wind that's planned for the UK to meet the energy needs of future generations, help us meet net zero in 2050. And essentially getting these projects through a consenting landscape that's incredibly complex and has a lot of intertwined issues attached to it. So it's not just how do we consent the offshore infrastructure, but it's how we listen to local communities that are affected by this kind of ancillary infrastructure like onshore cabling and substations as well. It's a challenge because of the number of people involved in it and the number of processes involved in it. You have your turbines, which are out at sea, which need to be placed in a location which is going to minimize environmental harm. You need to then try to get that power that's generated back to shore using inter-array and export cables. Of course, those again have physical impacts on the marine environment. And then when you get to the coastline, you need to land those cables, put them into some sort of substation, which may or may not exist, and then get them across country to where the power is needed. But then it's not in a location that's easily accessible to the end user. So you need to plan for that. Now, it sounds quite simple. You know, you put some stuff offshore and you connect it up to cables and you plug it into the national grid. But all of these systems work independently of each other. And there are multiple pressures affecting each of these systems. And yeah, as I said earlier, multiple stakeholders that are engaged in the process with competing demands, competing priorities. And it's how we plan ahead to ensure that developers still want to build offshore wind in a competitive and quite challenging landscape where at the time of promoting a project, at the time of designing a project, there's no guarantee that they will have a spot in a substation to attach to the national grid. There's no guarantee of capacity. We hear a lot about hydrogen. We hear a lot about nuclear. These are all competing industries for offshore wind. And hey, let's face it, just building an offshore wind farm is complicated, it's difficult. because it is just so challenging unless we have strong policy direction that this is what we want to do, strong policy support. You know, offshore wind farms can fall down on the smallest thing, and it's usually the terrestrial elements of a project. What it's costing us is essentially energy security going forward, and meeting those net zero ambitions. We have great ambition, but we have a lot of little problems to solve, and all of those little problems add up to, as I say, uncertainty. And we need kind of that strategic approach to look across everything to find a way forward that works. Thinking ahead to solutions, and the solutions here being, how do we consent offshore wind in a more joined up and less risky way? There are many ways that we can approach this. I'm going to come at it from a slightly different way to what's often said, which is, we'll just improve the consenting regime. For me, I mean, I guess, originally a town planner and then moved into offshore. I'm very interested in regulatory systems. I'm very supportive of them. They're there for good reason. I don't think the system is broken. I think it just needs some tweaks, and those tweaks are in the way we operate it. You can see consenting regimes or any kind of regulation as either barriers to innovation and development. It's something that stops you from doing things, or you can see it as kind of guardrails and guidelines of the extent to which you can work in. So they just kind of show you a way forward and you can operate within that. I'm definitely of the view of the second one. So how we solve the emerging problems of offshore wind is to talk to each other, to talk across discipline, to talk to different people within this system. And it's not just, say, within the kind of environmental impact assessment for an offshore wind farm, benthic ecologists talking to engineers, although that would be great for starters. It's going wider than that and getting grid involved in conversations, getting policy involved in conversations, and most importantly, getting local communities involved in conversations so they can actually see the benefit of what we're trying to achieve. We're all experts in our individual fields. We know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. As a sector and as industries, we need to be much more comfortable working with that uncertainty of our own knowledge. So accepting that we don't know everything. And some of the best conversations I've had in my life, that where I've learned the most, have been talking to people within this kind of wider wind energy system. But unless you have those wider conversations, you don't gain that knowledge and you can't implement it. And we're all doing our own different thing, trying to work towards a goal, but not quite getting there because we're doing things in parallel rather than as a collective. Looking forward, I'm actually quite optimistic. I know a lot of people working in this area across the piece, really great people that actually want to make this work. So we can be optimistic because the conversations are starting and we're becoming more aware of what is needed. Essentially, if you're working in this area, pick up the phone, talk to someone kind of outside your direct system in the wider offshore wind, in the wider energy system. And that way we can all be kind of working towards the same goal rather than seeing other people within that system as a problem that, hey, if only they solved it, we'd be fine. We all need to work together.